As you all know, the main strategy in preventing wide community spread of the SARS-CoV-2 infection is the early diagnosis of the disease in combination with contact tracing and quarantining of exposed contacts. So, real-time PCR is the mainly available diagnostic method at present to diagnose acute infection to fulfill these strategies. Apart from that, rapid antigen tests are also available, even in Sri Lanka as well. In addition to that, the World Health Organization has introduced health guidelines that should practice in order to overcome the prevalent COVID-19 pandemic. And it's worth to know the scientific basis behind these guidelines for better results. So today we have invited Dr. Rohitha Muthugala as the guest speaker of our program. So on the behalf of our society, we warmly welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Rohitha Muthugala, and Senior Lecturer Dr. Charita Mendis, and all the participants to our program. From now on, you can engage with the session. Over the next few hours, you will be able to gain more knowledge about the scientific explanations behind the health guidelines, available diagnostic facilities and utilization of them, building community awareness, next expectations, and finally, how to face the future personally as well as the community.
Now, I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Rohitha Muthugala. He is a consultant clinical virologist at National Hospital Kandy, and also he holds degree of MBBS, diploma in RNDP, postgraduate diploma in medical microbiology, MD in medical virology. Apart from that, as his COVID-related work, he works as a consultant of medical virologist in Regional Clinical Virology Laboratory and Subnational Laboratory for Human Influenza Virus Surveillance, National Hospital Kandy, and COVID-19 Detection PCR Laboratory for Central Province-based Hospital, Teldenia. Other than that, he is an off-site consultant virologist for peripheral COVID-19 detection PCR laboratories, and also he is a member of National Expert Advisory Committee on COVID vaccine, Expert Advisory Committee to Development of COVID-19 Clinical Management Guidelines, Expert Advisory Committee to the National Medicinal and Drug Regulatory Authority on COVID-19 vaccines and medical devices registration. So I cordially invite Dr. Rohitha Muthugala to continue the session. And also, I would like to remind you, if you have any questions, we will give you a separate time to raise your questions at the end. So for now, please kindly mute your mic.
Right. Thank you, Sanduni, for that kind introduction. Good evening to everybody. Thank you for inviting me for this lecture. I will be doing I'm trying to share my screen actually. Right, can you see my slides?
Yes, sir, we can see.
Okay, then today I will give you some brief introduction and I will discuss a bit of a scientific basis on the laboratory diagnosis as well as the preventive measures and why we do these preventive measures, what are the implications of these things. Actually, I think everybody now know in and out about COVID. So I will give these aspects to just inspire and get some knowledge to you all. So I think already you can remember these things. Everything started in December 2019. I think Professor Sunil Chandra has already covered these areas. There was an outbreak of viral pneumonia was detected in Wuhan in Hubei province, China, which is linked to a wet market. And they have identified this as a novel coronavirus. Here is a very important factor. First, what they did was they tested for other known respiratory viruses and microbes using PCR technology to identify the agent. But the all tests gave negative results. So then they go directly into the next generation sequencing, and they identified a sequence of a virus which is very related to a coronavirus. That's how they have identified this virus. So this is a very important thing in modern science, where the molecular diagnostic technology can be applicable, especially the sequencing, to identify an outbreak as early as possible. So, but somehow they have identified, but unfortunately it has spread into the other part of the China and the surrounding countries in the late January, and maybe early and end of March, this has spread into the all over the world, and WHO has declared this as a global pandemic. So later, this disease is named as COVID-19 and virus as a SARS coronavirus 2. I think all you can remember these stories. So I think little bit of about virology. I think you already covered this area. It's an envelope positive sense RNA virus. There's a crown-shaped projections outside the virus. That's why we call it coronavirus. This is due to the spike protein, and there are many other structural proteins like nucleocapsid protein, M protein, and E protein as well. So as you know, this SARS-CoV-2 is belong to Coronaviridae family, and there are 4 human coronaviruses, which is seasonal virus, which can cause mild common cold, especially in temperate countries. These are OC43, HCO229E, like NL63, and human corona HKU1 viruses. And there were 2 pandemics caused by SARS-CoV and MERS due to coronaviruses. SARS was occurred in 2003 to 2004, and MERS 2013 to 2015. And the most important thing is this SARS-CoV-2 also very closely related to SARS and MERS viruses. Considering evolution history, I think all coronaviruses were originated from mammal hosts, mostly from bats. As you can see, the human coronaviruses, all 4 has originated from bats and rats. And later, it has adapted into human beings. Same as SARS and MERS also, they originated from bats, they were intermediate hosts, and then they were adapted into human hosts. Later, this has happened, the SARS-CoV-2 also originated from bats. We were not very sure about the intermediate hosts. Some say the pangolin is the intermediate source, and it's jumped into humans. Now it's adapted into the humans, and it is transmitting very fast among humans. So I think in future, maybe the prediction is this virus also will adapt into humans very well, and we will become like a human coronavirus, transmitting among humans, producing mild disease as a seasonal virus. That is the thing we can expect with this virus. So I will move into a topic given to me. Actually, this is how we prevent this infection and what is the scientific basis of this one. So this virus mainly transmitted through the respiratory secretions. The symptomatic patients or asymptomatic patients will excrete virus through their respiratory secretions, especially their nasal secretions, oral secretions, and sometimes eye secretions. So when the patients or these people can sneeze or cough, they will produce large amount of droplets. These droplets can transmit in by air to the adjacent place, and people can get infected. Or otherwise, these droplets can be dropped into intermediate objects like your pens, desk, or the place, mobile phones and everywhere. Then they can last these surfaces for maybe 5 to 6 days. When the people touch those places, they will get the virus contaminated into their fingertips. And if you touch it, your mouth or face or eye, the virus can enter into the human body. And there are another route is that fecal route, oral route also possible, because virus can be excreted in the human feces as well. So how virus enter into the body? It can be directly inhaled by the human beings. So it can enter through your respiratory pathway by inhalation. Or otherwise, these respiratory droplets can be deposited into your mucous membrane, especially eye membrane, the nose, and the mouth. So it can go into the human body. Or otherwise, if you touch the contaminated objects, you can inoculate these viruses into those mucous membranes and it can enter into the body. Or rarely, you can get these viruses from the fecal-oral route as well. So this is to remember, the main entry points are our respiratory mucosa is the entry point. The main entry point is nose, then the mouth, then the eyes. So moving into that, transmission mainly occurs during viremic phase. Usually patients are infectious 2 days before onset of symptoms up to 7 days. So we say that patient is febrile. The febrile if patient is infected 2 days before, and they can excrete the virus up to 7 days. This is mild symptomatic or asymptomatic patients. But if patient is having a severe infection, they can excrete the virus up to 10 to 14 days. And even immunosuppressed patients can shed the virus for longer durations, maybe more than 21 days. That is why our health guidelines are based on this transmission related dynamics. So now we say if a patient is asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, they can come into work or they can release from the discharge after 10 days because they are belonging to the first category, because they excrete the virus only up to 7 days. If it is patient is having severe infection, we can keep the patient in isolation up to 14 days because these people can tend to excrete the virus longer because their lower respiratory tract is a place for multiplication of the virus. For immunosuppressed patients, because of their immunity is less, they tend to excrete virus longer duration because they can't control the virus excretion. So we have to isolate these patients more than 21 days, or we have to do 2 negative PCRs to discharge these patients and consider them as non-infectious. That is the basis of our isolation policy, right? If I think you all can remember when these infections occur in last year, we tend to isolate these patients for longer duration, probably 14 days for in an institute after exposure, then another 14 days at home. But now we know all these. Now our knowledge is more about this virus, about this pathogenesis, about the transmission dynamics. So now we have come into that our isolation policy is based on our scientific evidence that asymptomatic patients or mild symptomatic patients, you can keep them 10 days isolation is adequate. I think you can get the point, right? The other thing is the symptomatic patients are responsible for more than 85% of the transmission. So asymptomatic patients are only responsible for 15% of the cases of transmission. Why? The symptomatic patients have the mechanism to excrete the virus because they produce cough, they produce sneezing, so they will excrete large amount of viruses. But compared to that, asymptomatic patients, they don't have a mechanism to excrete the virus, the natural mechanism. But they can be also source because when these people, asymptomatic people, are chatting, laughing, or they are singing, they can produce aerosol from their mouth, oropharynx. So they can transmit the virus. So based on that, our control measures can be applicable. Like if you see, the problem is the asymptomatic patient. The symptomatic patients, we know they will produce the cough, they know the symptoms. So we said, if you are symptomatic, don't come into work. Don't come into your education institute till you are symptoms free. So we can remove those people. The problem with the asymptomatic ones, we don't know how to identify them. But the thing is, asymptomatic people will produce the transmission related aerosols when they are laughing, coughing, and singing. They do not have the normal mechanism. So what we can do is we can minimize our gathering. When they use the mask, it will block the shedding of the virus. So that is why we say when you are eating, you can go separately, one by one, and go and eat, because they have to remove the mask. And other thing is, lot of mistakes we are doing is in Sri Lanka, when we eating, we chat among each others. So the asymptomatic people can produce aerosols at that time. And we might do some small parties and those kind of a situation. We might remove the mask and we will gather together. So we have to prevent that. From transmission of asymptomatics, we have to apply our transmission-based precautions. So what is the basis of preventive measures? So obviously we have to block our port of entry. The port of entry is our respiratory mucosa, the eyes, respiratory tract, the nostrils, and the eye. So we can cover those places with the mask. The mask we have to wear properly. It should be tightly fitting and it should be covered properly, your mask and your nose and the mouth. The other thing is you have to put the face shield, because these viruses can be dropped into your conjunctiva, the eye mucosa, and virus can enter through the conjunctiva and can go into your human body. That is how we have to cover our port of entry. The other thing is, when you are the patient, if they are coughing or sneezing, they can reduce the number of viral particles shedding into the environment by using a mask. So if you use mask and a face shield, you will be safe in an environment. The other thing is, we can apply hand washing and hand rub techniques. Because I said these viruses can be in our environment with our objects. So if you touch these objects, and then we can contaminate our hands and we can inoculate it ourselves. So by hand washing or using alcohol hand rub, we can prevent that cycle also. The other thing is social distancing and minimum gathering. If your infected patient is there, then if they cough or sneeze or they generate aerosols, it has to be go and dropped into the other person. So if you keep the distance, the chance of getting infection is less. Another thing is minimum gathering. When the chance is less, getting contacted with an infected person. Then the contact tracing and isolation. All the positive patients should be contacted, detected, and then they will be isolated. And also other important thing is, we have to use task appropriate personal protective equipment, especially the healthcare workers. It should be task appropriate. Now you can see many people are overusing personal protective equipment. Some are not using as well. So it should be task appropriate. If you are doing aerosol generating procedure, you should wear the face mask, the eye shield, then the head cover and the apron and everything. But if you're just seeing the patient or just hanging around in the hospital, you need only the mask and the face shield. But you have seen many people using gloves and then the overalls and everything, but it is inappropriate use, because this virus won't go through your skin. So only go through your respiratory mucosa, maybe oral mucosa and the eye mucosa. And the main strategy of prevention, this is the vaccines. I think you already covered that topic as well. So moving into the pathogenesis, this virus is enter into the body and then it will bind into the ACE2 receptors. And the receptor binding is maybe 10 to 20 times more than the SARS coronavirus previously. That's why this virus is transmitting very fastly. And these ACE2 receptors are in the all over the body, in the brain, in the gastrointestinal system, heart, then the vascular system and the lungs as well. So the patients they go into the respiratory tract and this virus can be spread into the other systems as well. So it can produce different complications. That is why these people can produce with the respiratory tract pneumonia, respiratory distress syndrome, and they can get the cardiac complications. They can get these clotting problems. Some can present with the encephalitis. Some can present with a diarrheal illness. That's how we explain these symptoms because the receptors are there. So the virus can go into and bind these receptors and produce these organ-specific symptoms. Then moving into diagnosis, there are several diagnostic methods. Mainly is the molecular methods. There are many methods. The gold standard is the real-time RT-PCR, but you can use these new techniques like CRISPR methods, microarrays, and also old method like LAMP method, loop and mediated amplification method. Then we can go for antigen detection. So, but sometimes we can use these imaging techniques like CT scans, MRI scans for that. Then viral isolation is only for research purpose. Only viral isolations is need to be performed only in the biosafety level 3 facilities. I will talk a little bit about antibody detection as well. So moving into sample collection for PCR, we have to collect the respiratory samples because the virus is in the respiratory tract and it really infects the other places, but we have to collect from the respiratory tract. So what are the samples we have to collect? One is nasopharyngeal swabs and the oropharyngeal swabs. We have to collect both because the chance of getting positivity is high if you collect both ones. Otherwise, patient is on ventilator, you can collect ET secretions, or in a dead patient, you can collect lung biopsy. The important thing is this is virus, so it is not stable. So you have to collect these into the viral transport medium, which stabilize the virus, or we have to collect into the nucleic acid stabilizing medium. This medium will stabilize the viral RNA, but destroy the virus. So it is safe to use as well. Other thing is when you are using a swab, it should be Dacron or nylon swab should be used because cotton swabs, if you use the cotton is bit of an inhibitory effect for the polymerase chain reaction. And also the cotton, the cells will go into the cotton swab inside. It's very difficult to shed these cells into the transport medium as well. And these are viruses and these are RNA. So we have to keep the temperature accordingly, and you have to transport these samples into the laboratory with ice. You have to maintain 4 to 8 degrees centigrade for this one. So that is the basis of collection sample. So this is a virus and it's RNA virus. So you need some medium. Otherwise you can't collect dry swabs like for a microbiological investigations. And you can't use this cotton swabs, which you commonly use for other swabbing purposes for this one, because it will be inhibitory for PCR, as well as the cotton swabs, the cells will go inside this cotton swab. So when you put it into the medium, the cells won't shed into the medium. So PCR can give false negative results. That's why we select this Dacron and nylon swabs. So when you are collecting the sample, you have to wear the personal protective equipment because patient can cough and sneeze. Right? Then you have, when you're collecting the sample, you have to put the N95 or KN95 mask, face shield, then the head cover, the apron, and the gloves. Otherwise, your face and your outer surface will be contaminated. The other thing is, the important factor is you have to collect the sample from the nasopharynx, not from the anterior part of the nostrils. Why? These respiratory viruses infect only the column epithelium, not the squamous epithelium in the anterior side. If you take the sample from this anterior part, the early part, the sample will not contain the virus, then the results will be negative. This is for both for rapid antigen testing and the PCR testing as well. We have to get the sample from the nasopharynx. Here we use this flexible swab which can enter into the nasopharynx. For oropharynx, you can use the thick swab with a thick shaft. Then moving into real-time PCR, which is considered as a gold standard test. But with this demand, actually one good thing has done this COVID pandemic is that our molecular diagnostic technologies and everything has been improved. So now automation is available for extraction as well as PCR. Now point of care PCRs are available. Now the rapid PCRs are available as well. So PCRs have high sensitivity. Usually it's considered a 90 to 95% sensitivity if the sample contained the virus. But if you collect from the patient, it would be 70 to 80% because the collection problems and the intermittent virus shedding. And the specificity is always 100%. But it is too sensitive. We have another problem with this PCR because these patients, the corona patients, can excrete the RNA particles 3 to 4 months following an infection. Like if you infected after 3 to 4 months, even you can detect viral RNA in their samples. So you can't sometimes differentiate whether this is that due to a disinfection or it has happened maybe 1 to 4 months ago. So that is another problem. So moving little bit of about real-time PCR. Now we are using this commercial real-time PCR. It's commercially available. There are so many commercial products. And usually these commercial kits usually do 2 to 3, at least 2 or at least 3 viral targets and internal control. Usually we targets the E gene or N gene or S gene or ORF or RDRP genes of the viral targets. Sometimes this E gene could be a coronavirus and or beta corona B lineage. This is SARS-like virus. NS and ORF and RDRP is specific for SARS coronavirus. And same time for diagnostic testing, we use this IC we call it is internal control because we have to know whether the PCR reaction has worked or not. So sometimes this internal control is an endogenous one. We added into our extraction procedure or a master mix, or sometimes it's it's endogenous one. It's a human target. So we check that one, or if it is exogenous one, we added into our master mix of our extraction procedure. And we do the PCR cyclic conditions according to the manufacturer, and we give some the CT value. I think you know the CT value is a cycle threshold value where the signal is cut our threshold line. So if it is low CT value, we say the sample contain high viral load. If it is CT value is high, it appears late, we say the sample contain low virus amount. Moving into the rapid antigen testing, which is introduced very lately, maybe last year, end of last year. It is easy to use. The results can be obtained from 20 minutes like that. You need just only minimum training and minimum facilities. You can do this one with in a remote, even in the field setting. But for this one, you have to collect the sample into the special medium, which inactivate the virus, but it will preserve the viral proteins. The collection procedure is the same. You have to get the sample from the patient's nasopharynx. The advantage of RAT is that we can detect the patient in the infectious period. We can detect around 80 to 90% of the patients in their infectious period. That means maybe within first 7 days of illness. by using this rat technique compared to PCR, which can be positive for even months after the infection. So if it is patient is like, if you are suspecting this is a past infection, you can follow it up by another rat testing to exclude whether this is a acute infection or which a past infection. But very important thing for rat is that you have to select quality kits. Maybe we have to use WHO or our National Medicinal Regulatory Authority approved kit for rat testing. And when you are doing rat testing, you have to adhere into the correct techniques. It's very important because you have to read in 20 minutes. Or sometimes in the 15 minutes, after 20 minutes, it can give the false positive results. And also you have to collect the samples without blood stain. And sometimes these kits can contain positive and negative control subs also. Sometimes it happens that accidentally people has used this positive control subs also. The rat is, we use the lateral flow or immunochromatographic techniques, and it detect only the N protein. So this variant problem will not affect rat testing. Then patients sometimes may present late or with pneumonia or post-COVID symptoms. At that time, PCR and rat can be negative. So for that case, we can use this CT scan or MRI scan, sometimes chest X-ray, also diagnosis of COVID complications, COVID lower respiratory tract infections. Moving on to antibody detections, there are different assays using different targets. Some assays use anti-S antibodies, that spike protein antibodies. Some assays use anti-nuclear capsid antibodies. So if you are looking for a immune response following vaccination, you have to use anti-S antibodies. If you use for a detection of infection following detection of infection, you have to check for a anti-nucleocapsid antibodies. And there are different techniques. You can use chemiluminescent techniques, ELISA techniques, and the immunochromatographic techniques as well. But now this clinical utility of this antibody testing is very questionable. Earlier, it was included into our discharge criteria because it gives indirect evidence of non-infectivity, because patients will produce antibodies 7 to 10 days after infection. So you can say if it is antibody is positive, this already this infection passed 10 days. So it gives the indirect evidence of non-infectivity, but it's not a definite evidence of non-infectivity. The other thing is IgM response in these patients are very poor, and only 60% of the patients will produce antibodies following infection. And also antibody test can be used for detection of post-COVID syndrome or late phase infections. But now is the problem that most people are already vaccinated. So if you are using this anti-spike protein antibodies, you can't differentiate whether this anti-spike protein antibody is due to vaccination or due to infection. So in that case, you have to go for a anti-nucleocapsid antibodies to detect whether there is a past infection. And checking for evidence of immunity is not recommended. Even WHO is not recommended to check for immunity after vaccination by detection of antibodies. Moving into a little bit of about antivirals. There are many antivirals now already using for this one, but all of them have not proven the 100% benefits. The remdesivir, favipiravir, lopinavir, and ritonavir like drugs, all are proteinase inhibitors, which is used in the HIV as well. They have been used for these COVID viral infections. Some studies shows promising evidence, but some say there's no effective advantage on this one. Also, other drugs like hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, also used for the treatment for this infection, but the evidence is not conclusive. Some say okay, some say no. Still too early to come into a conclusion on that. So moving into the future directions, actually, we have to then a little bit of about mutations and variants. This SARS coronavirus has a relatively stable genome and it has a stable ability of proofreading. So the occurring of mutations is very slow, but mutation can happen, then variants can be produced. Why we are worrying about variants? Why? Because sometimes variants can affect our vaccine efficacy. And maybe the variants can affect our diagnostic assay sensitivity because our diagnostic targets have changed. Then the test cannot be detect this virus. And if it is variants can affect with the viral virulence and disease severity also may be affect with the transmissibility. That's what happened with the Delta variant. Delta variants has a higher transmissibility. Up to now, it's very lucky that the most of the variants are only the variants are of concerns. They are not the variants of high consequency. But the important thing is we have to prevent appearance of variants. That's why we have to prevent the spread. If it is spreading, even with the vaccination population, if it is spreading very rapidly, there will be chance of getting more mutations. Then the mutations can be selected and the emergence of variants can be occurred. This one, then move into our future directions. In future, I think we have to do continuous monitoring of these variants because we are worried about now variants of concerns are there. Maybe in future, maybe variants can appear with affecting of our management, maybe vaccine inefficacy, or maybe affecting our diagnostic procedures as well. And also we have to look for identifying biological markers to predict patients' outcome. If we can identify some immune markers early, if this patient can go into a severe complication, that will be good because we can select those patients and we can give some more attention to these people. And also we have to do testing or more development, more discovery on antivirals and other immunomodulators to treat these diseases. And also we have to look for a new vaccines as well. May not be these vaccines will be effective for a coming variants. The other important thing is we have to do continuous virological surveillance of respiratory viruses in animals and humans. Because of this corona, I think we already forgotten the influenza. So influenza also very important. We have to continue this monitoring and identifying appearance or emerging of new virus, and we have to stop the spreading of these viruses. And also we have to adapt this new normal life with, we have to live with our personal protective equipment, especially with face shield and the face mask and the social distancing for another maybe couple of years. And what will happen in the future? There are many speculations. Many people say this virus will become a seasonal virus like other human coronaviruses. I think the Delta variants has give that clue because the incubation period become very short, the viremic phase become very short, and now it's become like a flu, but it's spreading. The other some speculation is maybe there are very severe epidemics in future due to emergence of new variants. That's why we have to prevent the appearance of the variants. So thank you for hearing me. I have went it very quickly and it's just very short one. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you very much, sir, for the great explanations. Now we have reached to the end of the session and hope you got a better understanding of COVID-19 pandemic. If you have any questions to be clarified, you can unmute your mic and directly ask questions from our resource person, or else you can put your questions in chat box as well. And also, I would like to remind you that we'll post the link to the feedback form in chat box. So you can use that link to give your feedback to improve our upcoming events.
you need any clarifications or anything, I will do it.
So, sir, we have received some questions. So one of them is how to diagnose COVID-19 effectively due to its changing rapidly, creating variants.
Can you give me 1 minute because I'm getting a call from the hospital? Shall I answer that question?
Okay, sir. Okay, fine.
So sorry for the disturbances. So they want to know about how to detect the variants or the how it affects the diagnostic test during variants. Can you repeat the question, please?
Okay, sir. The question is how to diagnose COVID-19 effectively due to its changing rapidly, creating variants.
So for variant detections, variants will not affect our diagnostic assay, the real-time PCRs, unless our detection targets has changed. For variant identification, we have to go for a special testing. There are PCR kits are available for the detection of variants. We can use that one because we know what is the genome area, genetic area, which has mutated on that variant. So we can use the target selecting those areas. So now variant detection PCR kits are available. It can detect known variants. Like if you want to check for alpha variant, beta variant, or delta variant, you can check it. For a non-variant, you can use for a variant detection PCR assays. But if you want to identify unknown variant or already non-variant, we have to go for a sequencing. You have to get the genetic material of the virus, and we can use the sequencing. There are 3 types of sequencing methods, like first generation ones like Sanger sequencing. Now it's hardly used. Then we can go for a second generation sequencing or a third generation sequencing like Oxford Nanopore. And with that sequencing, we can get the genetic composition of that virus. Then we can identify whether its composition has changed from the original virus. For identification of variants or detection of like new variants, we have to do the sequencing as well.
Thank you, sir. We have another question. Can it change its transmission method to another way other than droplets?
The virus is excreted through the respiratory droplets, so it should come through our respiratory tract. So the virus can be transmitted with the airborne route, but not like airborne route in a varicella or measles. It can be in the environment. That's why we say it's airborne route. But the virus only excreted through our respiratory secretions, and it transmitted through our respiratory tract or our mucosa as well. So it can be droplet, it can be airborne, or even it's a fomites. And very rarely it can be transmitted to the fecal-oral route, because in a diarrheal patient can excrete the virus through their gastrointestinal tract. So if it is contaminated washrooms, or unless they wash their hands and they touch their mucous membranes, the virus can enter.
Okay, thank you, sir. Is it possible to use another transmission route, such as through open wounds in surgeries?
No, no, this is a respiratory virus. So the virus should be attached into the column epithelium cells, which has ACE2 receptors. You can say now it's a vasculature is having ACE2 receptors, but it should undergo rapid multiplication in our respiratory mucosa, and then it's enter into the our other organs, but it cannot go through our open wounds or percutaneous routes, because that is not the route for the respiratory viruses.
Thank you, sir. Most people are using masks again and again. Actually, some masks are made with clothes, so they can be washed. What you say? What you have to say about that, sir?
Mask is the two important things. One is the filtering effect. The second one is fitting. So mask should filter whatever coming from the outside. So if you use N95 mask, it will filter more. If you use surgical mask in a certain level, if you use cloth mask, the filtering level is less. The other thing, it should be fit. Otherwise, if it is the empty spaces, it can go into our respiratory tract without fitting. So based on what you are doing actually, if you are doing aerosol generating procedure, you have to wear the mask which has a high filtering effect and a high fitting, because it enters. If you are going in an outer door environment, you can use the cloth mask or a surgical mask. But somehow, I think the standard thing is to use a surgical mask, because the filtration effect is better than the cloth mask. The problem what you have is having is that surgical mask is a disposable one. You have to use only once. You can't wash it, keep it in the outdoor and use it. But for a cloth mask, you can wash in a certain times and you can use it. The important thing, other thing is the surgical mask and the N95, KN95, the outer surface, the virus can be stable for a couple of days, rather compared to washable face mask, because the outer surface is a hydrophobic for the N95 and the surgical mask, so the virus can stay for a longer duration than compared to cloth mask. So if you can afford every day, every time the surgical mask, that will be the option. Or otherwise, you can, if you use in the cloth mask, you have to wash it and use it again. Or if you have a N95 or KN95, maybe you can use it. Maybe you can get the 3 KN95 mask well fitting. You can use it one day and keep it 2 days in the sunlight and use it again. That you can use those masks for 3 to 4 weeks by rotating. But if you wash surgical mask or KN95, their filters will be affected and it's useless. But for a cloth mask, you can wash it and use it, but your filtration effect will be less, probably 35 to 40% compared to 60 to 70% with the surgical mask, 90 to 95 with the KN95 to N95 mask.
Thank you, sir. These days, most people are using double masks. So is that effective, sir?
Yes, it's effective, because if you're using like KN95 or N95 mask, you can wear that one. On top of that, you can use the cloth mask. So that effect will come, because the cloth mask is the outer surface. It has a less filtration effect, but it don't have that virus staying property, the hydrophilic nature of that. So if you can use that one and wash it and use on top of that KN95 or N95 mask, then your lifespan of the KN95 and N95 mask will be higher. But I have seen some people use the other way around. It is useless. And double mask always give the more filtration capacity if you are using 2 surgical masks or a 2 cloth masks.
Thank you, sir. What are the special factors that we should consider when choosing an effective hand sanitizer?
The hand sanitizer is what the ingredient. It should contain 70%, maybe 60 to 80% alcohol or isopropanol. That's what it should contain. But try to avoid the sanitizers which contain some these like they added some perfume, some added like stabilizers, some put some color materials. We don't know what will happen with these materials if we use in the future for a long duration. So if you can use pure, maybe 70% alcohol or isopropanol, that will be the better. And always select the pure product rather than product with the preservatives, maybe like perfumed one or a colored one or a gel one contain glycerin, so that's not a problem. But try to use at least the pure product.
Okay, thank you, sir. Are there any side effects of using masks and sanitizers rapidly for a long time?
Mask, some people are getting allergic rhinitis, and for these fabrics in the mask. And the other thing is, I have already mentioned that stabilizers and those other components in the hand sanitizer might cause skin irritation and also maybe allergic dermatitis and skin conditions. And also we don't know long-term environmental issues and other factors associated with these stabilizers added into the sanitizers. Another important factor is that mass sanitization, like spraying the disinfectants into the open areas, is not recommended. I think you have. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Yeah, I got a small problem with my internet, so I have reconnected again. Are there any questions more?
Yes, sir. Sir, you told that PCR may be positive even after a month. So, what is used to confirm whether someone is recovered following COVID-19?
So the usual recommendation is not to do PCR after 3 months, actually within 3 months following initial infection. But sometimes people can present these people, maybe they coming with another symptom and they do the PCR, then the PCR will be positive. To identify that, we can go by the CT value, but the thing is CT value is not a good indicator because this is not like a blood sample. We are taking the sample from the like a surface. So the surface won't give a clear proper viral concentration. So what we do is, if a patient, like it's an asymptomatic finding, if it is PCR is positive, but CT values are high, then we do a RAT again, the rapid antigen testing 24 hours later. For rationale is that because sometimes we can't differentiate whether this is like a new infection or a past infection, because the viral load might be very low in the early phase as well as late phase. So what we do is 24 hours later, we do RAT. If it's a new infection, the viral load should be more in the following day. Or other thing is we can go for antibody testing, antibody against nucleic capsid antigen, or antibody against spike protein if they are not vaccinated. If it is positive, we can say already antibody is there. This infection is happened more than 10 days ago.
Okay, sir. Can a real-time PCR become negative within 1 day?
Usually no. But the thing is, if it is like past infection or a latent phase of infection, the viral shedding can be intermittent. If it is low viral load, that's very high CT value. If the viral load is very low, the following days it can be undetectable. And also there could be a sampling error as well. But the patient is in an acute stage, maybe within first 7 days of illness. If it is PCR is positive the following day, it cannot be negative unless there's a technical error or due to a sample collection error.
Thank you, sir. We have another question. Sir, what is the probability that a person who has recovered from corona infection will get the disease again? If there is any risk, how they manage that risk?
The probability is that the problem is only 60% will produce the antibody response and the immune response, especially for mild infection. So you say probability is around 10 to 15% within first 3 months. After that, the probability exactly not known, but you can get the infection. Maybe probability will go higher up, maybe up to 30 to 50%. But within first 3 months, it is extremely rare. It's not extremely, actually it's 10%, 10 to 15%.
Okay, sir. What is the best time to test a person by rapid testing or a PCR? And does the time to detect the virus depend on the test?
For rapid testing, best time is within 7 days of onset of the illness, the patient can get the positive results. After that, rapid test can be negative. But for PCR, it can be positive up to maybe up to 1 to 3, it's go up to 4 months as well. So what we do is, when the patient is symptomatic, within first day of the symptoms, we can test going for a rapid antigen testing or a PCR. Because the other idea is this is not to diagnose, to identify the patient, isolate, and also contact tracing. So you can't wait. If you are suspecting a patient, if it is symptomatic, we have to do it in the first day. If it is negative, if you have a doubt again, you have to follow up it in another PCR or RAT in a 24 hours later.
Thank you, sir. Sir, collecting sample for PCR is very painful in Sri Lanka than other countries. What is the reason for that?
Some countries actually use non-invasive techniques. Yeah, Sri Lanka, we use the correct technique. It's a well-accepted technique for the respiratory viruses. You have to collect nasopharyngeal swab and the oropharyngeal swab. That is definite. That is not the problem with our technique or something. But in some countries, they consider the people do not like to go in this invasive procedures and it's a bit painful. They make some alternation to continue this diagnostic procedures. That something is better than nothing. That is what they go into the collection of only saliva or a oropharyngeal swab, or they collect from the anterior part of the nostrils to give the more compliance. But the correct technique is the what we are using in here. Collecting nasopharyngeal swab, which is invasive, patient can get irritation and pain. So what we are doing is the correct one. But if people are refusing to do, especially in developed countries, they are even refusing the vaccination. No, to improve the compliance, you can go for that kind of a non-invasive one. Maybe checking in the saliva. At least they are refusing getting oropharyngeal swab, which is not painful. But all of them are sensitivity is less compared to nasopharyngeal swab.
Thank you, sir. How masks and sanitizers protect us from COVID? What is the scientific explanation that?
Yeah, the mask is that either two ways. Now if you do something, some maybe attackers or something coming, we have to lock our entry points in the country. So in the country, it's a airport and the harbor. So likewise, our entry point should be covered. So our entry points are our nose, which can go through the nose droplets, maybe the oral mucosa and eye. So you have to cover those places with a mask and the face shield. So if it is a mask, have a high filtration effect, you are more protected. The other way around also, we have to cover exit point as well. The exit point is our nose and the mouth. So virus will hit the mask and it will filter, and only the small amount will go into the environment. And that sanitization is that these viruses can be present in the environmental surfaces. If you touch those surfaces, and if you are not wash hand using soap and water or use alcohol hand rub, you can inoculate. Like what happened? If I touch here, I touch my mouth or nose or eye, I can inoculate the virus.
Thank you very much, sir.
So both ways.
Thank you very much, sir. As we are medical
you
laboratory
very much.
scientists, hello, sir.
Yes, yes, I can
okay.
hear you.
As we are medical laboratory scientists, what will be your advice for us to contribute on the research studies about this pandemic, other than participating in laboratory diagnosis? And I hope your advice will be helpful for us in our future career.
Yes, for you, I think first the best thing is to learn the basics of laboratory technologies, the basics. Because now here also, now we almost too much depending on the commercial kits. I think you are going for a clinicals, you will see in the laboratories, they put just into automated machine and get the results. But for like Corona, at the beginning, there were no commercial kits. So we have to, based on our in-house techniques, we have to develop our own test using raw materials and do the testing. We can't rely on commercial products for emerging infections because it will take some time. So that is very important thing. Have to learn basic techniques in virology, microbiology, not depending on the commercial things. Virus isolation, in-house PCRs, in-house ELISAs, like that. For use all raw materials and develop your own assays. That's what we did in the early part of the COVID outbreak. We don't have a commercial kit. We get down those primers and we design our test and we establish it. That's a very important thing. Don't forget basic techniques in infectious disease diagnosis. Do not depend on commercial kits only. The other thing is development of diagnostic assays. It's very important, especially molecular things. You have to know when you are giving a group of virus, you have to do the primer designing, then set up a molecule assay, do how the enzymes and those calculations, those things. That is for your learning purpose. For as a research base, you have to develop new diagnostic techniques. Maybe you can contribute into the vaccine development, maybe vaccine efficacy trials, maybe the surveys on other new viruses in the human-animal interface. And also you have to learn about and you have to contribute on the sequencing as well. I think in future, it's a molecular testing and the sequencing.
Thank you, sir. As it seems like there are no more questions from the audience, so we will wind up today's session. So now this is the high time to pay our heartiest gratitude to our guest speaker, Dr. Rohitha Muthugala, and to each and every person who contributed to make this event a success. To get an update about upcoming events, you can join with the official Facebook page of our society. In case if you're unable to participate previous sessions, you don't have to worry because we will upload them in YouTube. Hope to see you soon with another meeting. Till then, stay safe and good night. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much for inviting me for this session.